The White Mountain Minglers. Empty darkness engulfed the car on each side. My headlights were the only thing able to bring some physical clarity to my surroundings. The darkness was so intense that there was zero distinction on the horizon where the earth and the sky both met. I gulped down on what was then my third Monster energy drink from our 9-hour car ride, which, as of that point, was nearly finished. Frank gargled. The only sounds present were those of the car speeding along the empty highway, Frank snoring, along with the faint audio from Steve's phone as Steve sat curled up in the back seat, watching Netflix. He had his hoodie up and the dim blue light was practically the only thing in the car, aside from the GPS on the dashboard. Frank obviously was out cold, head conked back, mouth open and all. Then there was Chad, who took residence in the seat between Steve and Frank, also commonly referred to as the middle seat. He too seemed to be asleep, although him wearing his shades, even though it was dark outside, along with his all-too-perfect blonde swoosh, made him appear like a wax mannequin of the popular 80s TV show character, Max Headroom. Okay, now, this probably sounds pretty random, so allow me to explain the situation. It was the first weekend of September, Labor Day weekend, that my friends, Colin, Steve, Frank, Chad, and I all wanted to go on a trip before Colin and Chad's college semesters began to intensify, in which it'd be way more difficult to hang out. This trip wasn't just any ordinary trip, however. In fact, the next 3 days involved the 5 of us going hiking. More specifically, backpacking. We're going to be hiking within New Hampshire's White Mountains, which are part of the greater Appalachians that spanned up eastern North America, from where we lived back down to Maryland. The drive takes around 9 or so hours, traffic dependent obviously. And like I mentioned, it was Labor Day weekend, so we already knew that we had to go the extra mile to avoid any delays, especially since we drove up on the interstates near New York City and everything. Interstates that make for a living nightmare to drive on when you and what seems like 10 million others are all trying to go somewhere for the holiday. Now, going that extra mile is how we found ourselves and where we were as of the current moment. In the car at 4:30 in the morning, having driven all throughout the night. Since I was the one driving, I didn't get any sleep, meaning it is without a doubt that I may as well feel like garbage later on in the day. But anyway, our plan for the next 3 days goes as follows. We would spend the first day hiking up Mount Washington, which is the highest mountain in the northeastern US, before going to spend the night at the nearby Mountain Hut, run by a local organization club, aka the Appalachian Mountain Club. The next day involved hiking back down to the car, before simply sightseeing anything cool in the surrounding area, all before residing in a hotel that night. Our third and final full day was when the legit backpacking part of the trip came into play. We would drive south a bit to the base of Mount Lafayette, another cool mountain in the area, before hiking a long distance across rugged terrain, where we would stay at another mountain hut. Let's just say that we were all hyped to get this wilderness expedition into action. We hadn't been backpacking together all the way since back in the winter, when we went on that Laurel Highlands trip in Pennsylvania. But I really don't want to talk too much about that trip though, I'm sure you know. Anyway, another hour goes by and the sun was now rising, casting an orangish golden glow on the east-facing hills of dense spruce and birch trees. Even though we were just on the turn of the season, a few deciduous trees even began showing hints of orange in them, making the scene before us all the more mesmerizing. Colin, Frank, and Chad were now awake, but Steve had his eyes closed as of then. "Ew," Chad said as he stretched his arms over his head. He had likely gotten an entire 8 hours of sleep during that car ride. I kid you not. "Morning, Chad," Colin mentioned. He too seemed well rested. I then glanced in my rearview mirror and witnessed Chad holding back tears, even through his shades. "Well, boys, such beauty," he stated. I don't blame Chad for getting emotional. The scene before us is absolutely stunning, though definitely nothing to cry about. Just as we rounded a bend in the road, Steve almost seemed to jolt awake.
"Ho, ho, ho, man! This looks like it finna be lit, G!"
he exclaimed upon gazing upon Mount Washington in the distance.
"I didn't know that we gonna be doing like this hardcore shit, but your boy's down."
"I don't think it'll be that hardcore, Steve," Colin said. "I mean, there's a few rock scrambles on the way to the top, but other than that, the trail's nothing too serious in terms of technicality."
"Who the fuck said anything about taking the trail, man?
Steve snarkishly replied.
I'm taking my own route to get to the top in half the time.
I recommend you don't, Steve. You'll just get yourself lost, I mentioned. As the road drew us closer and closer to Mount Washington, we found ourselves driving over a river. Right by said river was a sort of mountain supply shop, if that's what you want to call it. I pulled off at it and swung into the parking space. Steve, Frank, we better stop here real quick so we can go over your bags. That way if you two need anything that you forgot, we can pick it up here, as this is pretty much our last dose of civilization before heading into the wilderness, Colin explained.
Fine by me, man. I completely agree. Your boy would be way too underprepared if we be doing shit this extreme, G.
So we all got outside. Steve and Frank got out their gear from the car's trunk. I immediately regretted not going over Steve and Frank's bags the previous night before we left, as all Steve had was a ratty and one backpack containing 3 Bang energy drinks, a butterfly knife, his vape charger, along with a Pocky 1-chip challenge with ghost peppers in it. Frank was no better. He had brought a giant pillow sack filled with the following: another giant pillow sack, his dad's tactical police spotlight, a northeastern tree, plant, and fungi identification booklet, a candle, and a whoopee cushion to top it all off. Okay, yeah, we should go inside and get you two some more stuff, I said. Frank cackled.
You were warning it. You can even once for a fee.
I ignored Frank, not knowing if what he said was sarcasm or if he was being serious. Regardless, however, he's going to need to be far better equipped if he's ever going to have any chance of making it up to the summit of Mount Washington. He's quite chubby and never exercises though, so we'll see. So the 5 of us walk into the shop and were blown away. It was like a miniature Bass Pro Shops in there. It was cabin themed and sold all sorts of outdoor equipment, along with a small food court as well. Colin and I went to go throughout the shop and hook Steve and Frank up with some useful gear, including some water bottles, a compass, a survival kit, along with a few extra snacks as well. Steve, Frank, and Chad decided they wanted to purchase a few items on their own accord too. I mean, y'all can get whatever you want, Steve, but I'm not buying all this for you, I told him. Steve had taken a whole bunch of ultra high-tech climbing equipment off the shelves. I'm talking harnesses, carabiners, ice axes, and heavy-duty ropes, just to name a few. I guess he would try and use these for his off-trail route he intended on taking.
It's good, man. Your boy can take care of the cost, no problem. And you just got a loan to buy my very own whip soon. That shit was like 15 grand.
So I guess Steve was intending on using money from a big loan he just got to pay for his items of leisure. Not even really sure that's possible, but with Steve, things are usually pretty weird like that. Anyway, Chad decided to buy himself a heated battery blanket that he could take up to the mountain hut, and Frank got a $50 gift card to the very store we were at right now.
Just in case I feel like getting anything on the way back.
We paid and hopped back in the car, but not before getting some breakfast from the shop, which simply involved some yogurt parfaits and energy bars for Chad, Colin, and I, and some sausage pancake patties for Steve and Frank. After driving for another 15 minutes, we arrived at the Mount Washington Trailhead parking lot. We would be taking the Almanusac Ravine Trail up to the mountain hut, where we would drop our gear at before continuing on to summit the mountain. We stepped out of the car and got our gear situated. Next, we figured we should review the game plan on a map before setting off. We huddled around Colin, who always carries the maps. Okay, so it's about 3.1 miles to the hut, and from there, be about another 2 miles to the summit. Based on the contour lines, it looks like the way up will be pretty rocky and steep. Not a lot of switchbacks, meaning it'll probably just be miles of straight uphill without any breaks, Colin explained. People like Frank began having second thoughts.
You feel like hitting the peaky pills, guys. I prefer to sit down more. And besides, being in a breath is pretty uncomfy, he whined. Bryce, man, shut your bitch ass up, pussy, Steve rebuked. We did not come all the way up here into the tough man's wilderness for your fat ass to sit here and whine. We came here to conquer the highest mountains of the land. If you don't want to be a real man to do this shit, you can wait in the porta potties for the night.
Frank, we can just drive you over to the train station, go straight to the summit, I said. Frank took quite some glee in this statement of mine. He squeaked in delight.
Well, Bruce, I would usually be one to opt for the train route instead of hiking. But this time of year is bulking season in the gym. We wouldn't want any unnecessary cardio affecting my mass, now would we, Bruce? But in this case, I have an even better idea,
said Chad. The next few seconds left us baffled. Chad began spinning around rapidly until we could no longer make out any distinct detail on him. Then, out of nowhere, a sleek red sports car appeared behind him. It was the revertible.
Now, I'll get you Bruce at the top,
he said to us as he hopped in the premium leather seats before adjusting his mirrors.
If you Bruce want to join me in soaking these mountain views the way they were supposed to be soaked in comfort?
We all declined. Frank still seemed like he was adamant on taking the steam train to the top, but the rest of us, we came to hike, not to bitch out. Anyway, the plan was set, I guess. Chad sped off in his revertible, and the rest of us drove over to the nearby train station to drop off Frank. Finally, we drove back to the trailhead and began our hike. The trail began by winding through a lush green forest. The terrain wasn't too hilly yet, so Steve decided to remain with us for the time being. He had all of his climbing gear slung around his shoulder and was blasting some Lil Yachty on his Bluetooth speaker to get hyped for the climb, as he claimed. The weather that day was drop-dead gorgeous. There wasn't a single cloud in the sky, and the temperature was around a stable 70 degrees. The birds chirped up in the tree canopy, and we all found ourselves crossing many bubbling creeks, all likely flowing into the nearby Amanusic River, which began high up in the very mountain in which we were hiking up. Soon, the trail began following alongside the Amanusic River. It was now that the trail began gaining a little bit more of an incline. Mount Washington appeared very intimidating down from this angle. It was over 6,000 feet in elevation, which is pretty high for the East Coast, and had some of the highest ever recorded winds to this day. I used a tree to help pull me up a big rock step. As soon as I stepped up, my phone began going off. I took my phone out and saw that it was a Snapchat call from Frank.
Of course this fat ass be coming already,
Steve said.
He probably exceeding the weight limit for the train.
I mean, we have been hiking for over 20 minutes by now, Colin said. He's probably at the top waiting for us already, and just calling us to rub in his achievement. I picked up the phone and was brought about to a view of Frank's chubby triple chin. He was heavily panting as he appeared to be running or something like that. He then moved his phone up, and we were able to see what was behind him.
Yep,
he squealed. Frank was running from the train. And no, I mean this literally. He was running on the actual train tracks that go up the mountain with the train gaining close behind him. The train conductor was aggressively pulling the horn, but Frank just kept on running. In the background, we could also see people sticking their heads out the window whilst laughing. They had their phones out and were recording the chubby kid in a sports fan jersey running up the train tracks. Frank, what in the world are you doing? Why aren't you riding the train? I shouted into the phone. The train was getting really close to riding up on his ass at this point, so Frank was forced to bail off the train tracks, causing him to land in some soft fir bushes down below. The camera was shaking around as he fell, and dirt was now smudged on the screen, but luckily, Frank was okay. Frank, what on earth were you thinking? Colin demanded. Frank then went on to explain how he grew bored waiting in line for the train and everything, and so figured he would simply get a head start by walking up the train tracks before having the train just stop to pick him up once it reached him. Obviously, this isn't how trains work. This is very stupid thinking on his end, as they can't just stop like that. Next, we had to guide Frank on exactly how to get on the train. Frank slowly stood up from the bushes and clumsily made his way back down to the train station. The whole process, I kid you not, took over 30 minutes to go through. Okay, Frank, now hand the man your ticket, I said.
Yuki!
Frank timidly replied. We stayed on the line with Frank some more, figuring we may as well continue hiking at the same time. We stayed on the line with him until he was safely sat down in a booth, and until he had a large cherry Dr. Pepper as well. He was content and happy at that point. Oh, man, what a dumbass, I said as I hung up. I agree, Colin replied. Let's just knock out these hills so we can get to the hut. The hills were getting steeper the more we hiked. The trees were changing too, now transitioning to the more alpine environment often found at the higher elevations.
Alright, man, I'll control it.
Steve said, going in for a dap-up. Don't get lost. I mean it, Colin told him, giving him the extra map that he could use. Steve insisted us not to worry and that he knows how to dominate the mountain and that he can bend the terrain to his will, whatever that meant. So yeah, with Steve gone, Colin and I were able to make quicker progress up the mountain trail. It was more peaceful too, without the constant noise from Steve's music interfering with the serenity. But yeah, the hike was quite nice. The uphills were pretty exhausting, but that was expected for such a hike. Pretty soon, the trees became thinner and thinner. The two of us crossed over waterfalls and high mountain streams, along with ascended numerous rock scrambles. Soon enough, we were above the tree line, and bare rock, scraggly bushes were the only things surrounding us. The views took the breath from us upon turning around to gaze at them. We still had a good deal more to climb, though, and so we pushed on. We had no idea that our hike on Mount Washington would have turned out this way, with everyone wanting to go their own way up. We were all supposed to hike together originally. This is crazy. Chad was driving up, Frank was taking the train, and Steve was who knows where, likely in some sort of frustrating kung fu match with all the dense bushes and trees. Something told me that he wouldn't even need to use all that climbing equipment, let alone ice axes, considering it was summer. Soon enough, and Colin and I arrived at the Lake of the Clouds mountain hut. It was built from wooden planks and was respectable in size for being referred to as a hut. Inside was a dining hall that overlooked the valley below. Colin and I noticed a sign walking up to the front door, a sign that read, in all caps, "No through hiker allowed." It didn't make any sense. I thought mountain huts like these were supposed to provide hospitality to those hiking long distance. It didn't make any sense at all, but we disregarded it. We checked in with our reservation for 4. The reason our reservation was for 4 people and not for 5 was because Steve downright insisted that he pay himself, with that loan money he claimed he has. That was honestly fine by us. Those hut reservations are quite expensive, so Colin and I weren't complaining that we only had to pay for 4 of us instead of all 5. After we checked in, we went and found our bunk room, which consisted of a small room with a bunch of bunk beds. Colin and I claimed our beds and reserved the rest of them for Steve, Frank, and Chad. We sprawled out all our gear and went to go and check out the rest of the hut. Since it was the middle of the day, the hut was quite lively, with many day hikers coming in and out. The time was only around noon, so many were eating lunch. Colin and I did the same. After we ate, we grabbed our water bottles, phones, and departed to finish the hike. We figured that Chad and Frank had been up at the summit for quite some time, and we didn't want to keep them waiting any longer. Anyway, the trail to the summit wasn't as strenuous as the one to the hut was. There were a lot more people too, which wasn't a surprise, as many people who drove up the mountain were likely making the 2-mile hike down to check out the hut, or even the nearby lakes, hence the name, Lake of the Clouds. 20 minutes went by, and Colin and I made it to the summit. The view was spectacular, but aside from that, the summit of Mount Washington also contained quite the amenities. There was a weather observatory, a restaurant, and even a gift shop. I then got a Snapchat message from Frank saying that he was at the food court inside the main building. And yeah, of course he was at the food court. And so that's where we went. As we strolled over to the building, we glanced down and were able to see the parking lot for the people who chose to drive up the mountain. As of the exact moment, a sleek red convertible was in the process of pulling into a parking space. It was the most smooth pull-in I'd ever witnessed in my life. Next, a tall, Chad, muscular-looking dude stepped out. It wasn't just any Chad-looking dude, though. It was actually Chad. He locked the car and made his way up the stairs to greet us.
"What's up, Bruce? Quite the Bruce-inspiring view, ain't it?"
he inquired. "What on earth took you so long to drive up here? It's been over 3 hours and you're just now getting up," Colin exclaimed.
"Oh, Bruce, no rush. I decided to swing by the town on my way up to the top for a gains lunch at Waffle House. We wouldn't want to tackle these gains and brutal elevation on an empty stomach, now would we, Bruce? Now, I say we bruise our way on over to the food court for some good mountain lunch."
Chad suggested. "I thought you said you just ate lunch," I questioned.
"Bulking season, bro? Bulking season?"
Colin, Chad, and I walked inside the crowded food court and soon found Frank sitting at a table by himself, chowing down on a greasy double cheeseburger with pickles and a side of greasy onion rings. "All right, hut's all taken care of," I told Frank and Chad. You two can finish lunch, then we can check out the views in the summit a bit more before heading down to the hut. Chad went in line to wait. The line was really long, so Colin, Frank, and I decided to pass some time by checking out the gift shop. Colin and I were just going to look around, but as always, Frank of course had the intention of buying something. I don't know what he would get though, as the gift shop didn't really sell anything all too interesting. Mostly the usual items like t-shirts, hats, bumper stickers, etc. But, as usual, Frank managed to find himself the most ridiculous item.
I get to make real candles now!
He exclaimed excitedly. Frank had picked out one of those gag gifts that claims you can make your own candles with your earwax. Yeah, like an earwax candle making kit. I knew that Frank would be disappointed though when he found out it wasn't legit. However, it was a beautiful day and we're all in a good mood, so we figured it'd be best not to burst his bubble quite yet. So yeah, Frank paid for his candle kit and we went back to the main area.
Over here, Rose!
A voice called to us. We spotted Chad sitting at a table with his lunch, which consisted of 2 double ranch cheeseburgers, some hot wings, along with some fries and an extra large milkshake. Chad, are you sure this is ideal for cultivating an aesthetic gym physique? Colin asked.
Here's the thing now, Rose.
Chad began to explain, a mouth full of food.
There's a really clutch concept referred to as dirty bulking. And as you bros already know, bulking season is really picking up pace. I need to make sure I'm not falling behind for when South Beach University makes the bowl ball playoffs. But yep, dirty bulking is effectively going off the framework. As long as I'm hitting my macros, then the physique will be secure. I'll clean up my diet in the springtime once cutting season rolls into play. But for now, I say good afternoon, cheeseburger.
Chad explained as he took a fat bite into his juicy patty. We all sat down and chatted with Chad whilst he ate. Just then, we heard a bunch of people screaming as we saw people running away coming from outside. We were beyond confused as it seemed as everyone was running in one direction. Our confusion, however, only grew when a man burst through the doors of the food court, shouting, "Everybody flee! The thru-hiker's here! Not a thru-hiker, the thru-hiker!" A bunch of people took the man for his word and fled. Frank, Chad, Colin, and I were the only people who, now looking back on it, stupidly remained. All of a sudden, it seemed as if the entirety of the Mount Washington summit fell silent. All we could hear was the sound of the wind howling from outside the windows, along with the now, growing in volume, sound of approaching footsteps coming from outside. We couldn't see who it was yet, but they sounded chubby and quite rhythmic, but sporadic at the same time. We assumed it was a thru-hiker based on what the man had just said, but just then, the thru-hiker himself stepped inside the food court. It was just then that we were able to realize why everyone else ran. We also now understood the meaning of that sign posted on the door of the mountain hut. It was no one other than Herbert Ernie himself.
What's it, fellas?
Herbert, what are you doing here? Colin demanded.
Well, I'm through hiking the Appalachian Trail, of course. I came down from Georgia. I'm now heading north up to Maine, the land of the moose.
Herbert replied enthusiastically. Cut the nonsense, Herbert. You did not hike over 2,000 fucking miles. Why are you up here? Do I need to call the cops on you? I said.
Oh, that won't be necessary. It's been a long journey, and I've been looking for a place to rest my achy knees. I've spent the past few hours tracking you lads, and when I saw you boys trickling to the mountainside, I figured I should stay the night there.
Frank squeaked. Herbert looked absolutely and utterly ridiculous. He wore a full and complete old-school hiking uniform involving knee-high boots, short khaki shorts that were way too short, a denim button-up sleeveless vest, along with a plaid bandana wrapped around his sweaty forehead, revealing his freshly buzzed, crazy buzz cut. He also wore one of those external-framed expedition backpacks on his back, most likely stuffed to the brim with all of his despicable gadgets and whatnot. His face was ultra chubby, as was his entire body, which took on the distinct shape of a pear. His potbelly took up our fields of view, and his triple chin oozed grease, pus, and cheesy sweat. Literally. His eyes were crazy and seemed as if they were looking at everything in the vicinity all at once. "Herbert, seriously, leave now," Colin ordered.
I'm not leaving,
Herbert said back, snarkishly.
No, now. It'll be getting quite lonely hiking up to Maine by myself. How about you boys join me? And together, we will be the Five Hiking Annies.
"No!" Colin shouted. "Guys, just let him be," I said. "He's probably just bluffing about this whole thing and probably just bored. Let's finish up here, then head back down to the hut. Then we can use the no through hiker sign at the door to show Herbert that he can't come inside. And after that, we can just enjoy our evening in peace." "I guess you're right," Colin agreed. So anyway, as Chad finished up his meal, every once in a while a fry would fall to the floor, and where Herbert would slither up to it on his chubby belly like a snake, before consuming it without chewing. And once we were done in there, we soaked in the summit view one last time before making our way back down the trail to the hut, Herbert himself trailing close behind us the entire time. I think.
Where did Herbert go, Bruce?
Chad asked, sounding worried. Wouldn't worry about it. In fact, I think he might be off our tail, I replied. We rejoiced that our trip was now Herbert-free, though little did we know was just how wrong we would be. 10 more minutes went by, and we finally made it back to the Lake of the Clouds hut. Steve was still nowhere to be seen. I was kind of worried for him, as he was likely still off in the bushes of who knows where, but I decided to assure myself that he'd be okay. He was an adult, and by now, he should know how to properly look after himself. If he hadn't arrived by dinner, which is in a couple of hours, then I may worry a bit, but for now, I think everything was good. And so the four of us strolled inside the hut.
Now, this looks like quite the proper spot to relax and unwind after a long day of hitting the Broad Trail,
Chad mentioned. Quite an ironic statement for how little he hiked that day, if at all, honestly. Colin and I showed Frank and Chad to the bunk room we had been assigned to. Even though the hut was reserved to the maximum in terms of guests that night, the four of us seemed to have our bunk room all to ourselves, making sure to even save a bunk for Steve for whenever he arrived. Anyway, the remainder of the afternoon was uneventful, but chill nonetheless. Frank was tired from that strenuous train ride, and so he took an afternoon cat nap in the bunk room. Chad decided to take out a portable blender he brought to the dining hall to make himself an afternoon protein shake. And then Colin and I went outside to check out the nearby lake, which is pretty neat. Once the time was around 5:45, we all congregated in the main dining hall area, along with all the other guests staying at the hut. As of the current moment, the hut staff were in the process of setting the tables for dinner. Once they were done, we all took our seats. It was then that the main door to the hut swung open, and none other than Steve Murfinson came strolling inside. He was a complete mess. Dirt was encrusted in his messy hair, and his tank top was all tattered too. You could still hear the rap music faintly playing from his Bluetooth speaker, although by now it was all warped and staticky.
Gee, I'm starving. What be cooking?
He asked. Something tasty, the check-in guy replied. But you gotta check in first before you can eat. Do you have your reservation?
Nah, fam, but I'm bought it,
Steve said as he pulled out a random stack of cash from his pocket. Even from where I was sitting, I could tell that they were all ones. I'm sorry, buddy. The place is all filled to the maximum tonight. You need at least a 2 weeks in advance reservation.
Man, fuck you, ho. You don't let a real G spend the night here, but you're that fucking buzzman, but how do you spend the night?
Well, he had a reservation, unlike you. But don't worry. We can let you sleep in the dungeon tonight. If you agree to be put to work, we can feed you the dinner's leftovers.
Fire by me, man,
Steve replied. So the workers went to show Steve to the dungeon before taking him back into the kitchen for when it was time to do the dishes. I had actually checked the dungeon out earlier. It was essentially just a little area underneath of the main hut, within the foundation. To get to it, you must walk outside and around back, where you will find a little trapdoor. Inside is really nothing more than a ratty old crawlspace where the people who can't pay sleep. Next, dinner was served. Dinner involved some broccoli with lentil soup, bread rolls with butter, green beans, lasagna, and some brownies for dessert.
brownies!
Frank piped. The meal was pretty good, I will admit. However, people like Frank were pretty picky and only ate the bread rolls and brownies. After dinner, the four of us went to go outside and chill, as the evening weather was very peaceful to enjoy. Steve, I assumed, was in the kitchen, busy with those dishes. We sat around and chatted for a bit. Chad rambled on and on about how this year's football season would be the best yet at South Beach University as the lead all-star quarterback with his new bulking regimen and all. Anyway, the sunset was beautiful as it cast a bright orange glow on the bare mountains. We were all pretty tired from the day's adventures, and so once it got dark, we retired to sleep in our bunk room. Steve headed on down to the dungeon next. Chad, Colin, and I, however, actually went to the bathroom first to brush our teeth and everything. Once we got back to the bunk room, we found Frank already out cold in his bunk. He, I kid you not, actually had his earwax candle kit all hooked up to his ears. It consisted of 2 clear rubber tubes that were inserted into both of the ears. Those tubes were then connected to a sort of candle mold in which sat upright on his potbelly. What a dumbass, I thought to myself. I knew that piece of junk was bogus and wouldn't actually work. I crawled in my own bunk and turned over in my blanket, falling asleep almost instantly. I awoke in which, according to my phone, roughly 2 hours after I'd fallen asleep. I believe the reason for me randomly awakening was because of the now faint glow of candlelight coming from Frank's bunk. I groggily looked up and witnessed a 5-inch high full and complete earwax candle burning with a wick made out of twisted belly button hairs. Melted earwax stripped off the candle, congealing on his big belly. Frank, though, simply continued snoring away. Around 2 in the morning, I found myself being awoken again. It wasn't the earwax candle this time, though, as the dim flame seemed to have long gone out by this hour. This time, it was something else. I didn't quite know what it was, but I could feel it. My gut feeling was confirmed to be correct when I began hearing the faint sound of footsteps crunching in the gravel coming from outside the window. It was a full moon that night, so when the silhouette of a giant pear blocked out the moonlight, I immediately knew who it was. I hid underneath my blanket in fear that Herbert could see me, even though he likely could not. Herbert then began lightly tapping on the glass. This went on for about 10 minutes straight before I fell back asleep. I awoke in the morning to the sight of the uplifting sunrise shining into the east-facing window. Colin was already awake and was in the process of packing up his gear, and so I did the same. "Come on now, Frank, Chad, it's time to get up," I said, shaking them both awake. The weird part about Frank, though, was there was absolutely no sign whatsoever of any earwax candle at all. I dismissed it, though. Chad then got up and refused to come out from his blanket until he had used the restroom, as he claimed. Once he emerged, he was looking crisp and fresh as always. Breakfast that morning was simply some oatmeal with cranberries, along with pancakes and some wild Maine blueberry syrup. Steve came back from the dungeon, looking like a zombie. "Did you sleep last night, Steve?" Colin asked him.
Nah, fam, acid fine, active. I actually popped a Zagan last night before bed. I tweaked so hard it'd be giving me huge-ass hangovers.
"You sure you didn't feel like that because you slept in a dusty crawlspace?" I said.
Heh, man, that shit ain't nothing to me, man. I used to sleep like that every night back when I lived in the hood.
After breakfast, Steve went to do the dishes again before we hit the trail. At least, Steve, Colin, and I hit the trail. Frank and Chad would head back to the summit of Mount Washington, where Chad would give Frank a ride back down in his Brovertible. We agreed to meet in the main parking lot before departing our separate ways. Steve agreed to stick with us this time on our hike back down, though, which is probably best. Although, Steve did go on and on about how tough he had it yesterday with his whole climbing route and all. The hike down was pretty lax and chill. The weather was perfect like the previous day. It took us about 2.5 hours to make it down all the steep rocks that the trail presented in front of us. Once we made it back to the parking lot, though, we found Frank and Chad waiting for us in the Brovertible. It was evident that they had a lot of time to kill, as they had made a pit stop at a local Shake Shack for some lunch. Frank and Chad finished up their meal before Chad does the whole spinny thing again, by means of putting the Brovertible away for later. Next, we stowed our gear away in my car before we hit the road. Our destination for that day would be the town of Lincoln, New Hampshire. There, we had reservations for a Hampton Inn hotel, but as for during the day, we found a pretty cool swimming hole online that we could chill at. We drove about a half an hour into downtown Lincoln, where we checked into our hotel. It was nice enough for such a small town in the mountains. It had a pool, fitness room, along with the usual breakfast buffet with the waffle machine and all. After we dropped off our stuff in the room, we changed into our swim trunks and departed back out to the swimming hole. Chad, however, did not change into swim trunks. He, in fact, was still wearing his football Letterman jacket with jeans. "Chad, there's no way you're swimming in that," Colin said.
Okay, I'll admit it, bro.
Chad began.
I'm not as risky and dangerous as the rest of you bros are. I'm gonna play it safe and hold off on the swimming for today. Wild swimming holes like these are always known for being deceptive and deeper than they appear. Besides, underwater rip currents are not to be reckoned with, as my pops warned me from back on the ranch in Texas. So as for today, I might just swim in the Brew Till pool later tonight.
Though what Chad said didn't really make all too much sense. I thought rip currents are only found in the ocean. The swimming hole we were going to was only a mountain creek. Besides, I thought Chad would be super keen on revealing his bulked-up muscular physique. According to him, though, he wanted to wait until the spring to do his ultra-postponed gains reveal, as then he'd have more of a cut going for summer. Soon, we pulled out onto the side of a gravel road in the middle of the forest. We brought with us some towels, and Steve brought his vape pods, along with his Bluetooth speaker. We walked through the woods for about a quarter of a mile until we arrived at the swimming hole. It was a tad crowded due to it being a holiday weekend, but inviting nonetheless.
Man, this shit looks lit as fuck,
Steve said as he ripped off his tank top, revealing his scrawny physique. Frank, though, had the complete opposite, that being a potbelly, obviously. Chad then set up a hammock to relax in. Meanwhile, people like Steve immediately jumped in.
Whoa!
He exclaimed.
What's up, Steve? Here we go! Woo!
Frank shouted as he proceeded to cannonball in, right next to where Steve was.
Best man, you asking for it?
Just then, Steve and Frank began wrestling around in the water, splashing everyone in the immediate vicinity. They wrestled around for about a minute or so until Steve jolts up from the water, a look of pure disgust on his face.
Oh, fuck nah! This dude got earwax encrusted on his belly!
He shouted. Everyone who was at the swimming hole that day then began to laugh a bit. It was odd because, as of that morning, when Frank had his shirt on, there was no evidence of the earwax candle anywhere whatsoever. It seemed as if the earwax managed to soak its way through Frank's shirt and directly onto his potbelly. Anyway, the rest of our time at the swimming hole was all too enjoyable. The weather was perfect, the birds chirped in the trees, Steve had some music playing on a speaker, and Chad was chilling in his hammock. Everything was good. Colin and I swam around in the hole a bit too, while Steve went around to approach some chicks. This didn't really go all too well though, as Frank kept making him look like a doofus.
You never resorted to you, Steve. You and me used to play with like logs on plates,
Frank said.
Best man!
And yeah, that was basically it. It was getting pretty late in the afternoon at that point, so we all packed up our belongings and walked back to the car. From there, it was a quick 10-minute drive and we had made it back to the hotel. We went to a place called Diddle's Wayside Diner for that night's dinner. Surprisingly, we were able to be seated right away, despite it being a holiday. Next, it was time to order. I got the wild-caught rainbow trout with vegetables and rice. Colin got the same, only salmon instead of trout. Chad ordered the deep-fried protein bologna sandwich with a side of fried pickles and chips. Finally, Frank decided to get the, dessert for dinner oversized donut. And oh yeah, Steve ordered the broiled moose tongue, which looked disgusting. We all dug in next. The food all tasted pretty good for the most part. After we were done eating, we simply decided to retire to the hotel early for the night, as there wasn't really much else to do around where we were, besides hike. Speaking of hiking, we would need our rest, as we had quite a lot of that to do the following day. You know, that's if we wanted to make it to the Zealand Falls mountain hut before dark. Back at the hotel was pretty ordinary. There were 2 queen-size beds in which Chad and Colin claimed. I slept on the room's pull-out couch. Steve simply curled up in a corner and watched Netflix on his phone, using his hoodie as a blanket, and Frank just slept in the rolly office chair that the hotel provided. I read a book for a little while whilst Colin and Chad went straight to sleep. Steve and Frank stayed up pretty late playing on Roblox on Frank's Xbox. I had no idea how late they stayed up. I then awoke to my alarm set for around 7 a.m. I rolled over and felt a warm and squishy mass under the covers next to me. It was Frank. The weird part, though, was I thought he was sleeping in the rolly office chair. "Frank, what the fuck are you doing?" I said. Frank didn't even hear me, though. He was still obnoxiously snoring away. It was weird, although not a big deal. Moves like these aren't too out of the ordinary for people like Frank Wormings. Anyway, I got out of bed and hopped in the shower. Colin took one after me. Steve was already ready, and so was Frank. "Come on, Chad, let's go and eat breakfast," said Colin.
You bros, head on down. I'll meet you in the lobby. All I need is 5 more minutes and my perfect REM cycle will be complete,"
Chad groggily responded. The rest of us headed on down to the hotel lobby where the breakfast buffet was. Frank went and made himself a plate consisting of 7 fluffy Belgian-style waffles with sprinkles and whipped cream. "I wouldn't eat too much sugar, Frank. We've got a lot of hiking to do today, and you won't be able to take a train like you did from Mount Washington. We're in the real wilderness this time," Colin warned. But Frank didn't listen.
"It's fine. Besides, we're in no rush. I can take as many breaks as I want,"
Frank assured us. However, this didn't really assure us much of anything. Man, I really wish that there was a train that went to the Zealand Falls hut, though, as people like Frank are the slowest of hikers. Him and Chad, that is. I guess it was definitely a good thing that we were getting an early start that day, as, believe me, we definitely needed it without any doubts. Pretty soon, Chad came and joined us for breakfast. After we finished eating, we checked out of the hotel before tossing our gear into the car and then making the 10-minute drive to the trailhead. It'd be about a 5-mile hike from where we were to get to the hut. However, if we're feeling ambitious, we can make that distance even longer by making a few side excursions to climb some of the nearby mountains. But anyway, we stepped out of the car and tossed on our backpacks.
"Key bros, remember, nice and easy pace is key. Nice and easy,"
Chad reminded us. So then we got hiking. Colin, Steve, and I led the front, meanwhile Frank and Chad brought up the rear. We had to stop and wait for them like every 10 or so minutes, which did get pretty annoying, but at least we were making consistent progress. The time was around noon, so Colin, Steve, and I decided to wait at an intersection. Once Frank and Chad arrived, we had a quick lunch break. I simply had a few energy bars to keep it simple, but Chad, on the other hand, brought Chick-fil-A. "Chad, no wonder your pack was so heavy," I said.
"Bueno, bro. Proper fuel is the best way to make sure our bodies are trail ready," he replied. "Now, let's get to this hut before the afternoon storms that are brewing in the distance roll in."
Chad was right. According to the AccuWeather app, thunderstorms are fast approaching from the west, quite typical for the mountains in New Hampshire in the summertime. "Well, I guess that squashes our chances of going up South Twin Mountain," Colin says disappointingly. "Yeah," I replied. We all decided to scratch the idea of summiting that nearby mountain, as being on an exposed mountaintop during an intense thunderstorm is not a smart idea whatsoever. Steve claimed we were all being a bunch of wimps, but that opinion was on him, though Chad and Frank seemed ultra relieved upon the decision to ignore the mountain peak and to simply go straight to the hut. Though the catch was that we still had about 3 more miles until we made it there, meaning we would likely end up getting caught in the rain regardless. The good news was that the trail we were taking there wasn't nearly as hilly as the others, meaning collectively we should be able to hike at a faster rate, even with Frank and Chad. We wrapped up our lunch and continued towards the hut. Not 15 minutes after we began walking, and thunder was already clapping hard on the cloud cheeks in the sky. Next thing we knew, the deluge was upon us. Chad, Colin, and I all stopped to put on our pack covers, along with our raincoats, which did a pretty good job at keeping us dry. But people like Steve and Frank, on the other hand, were caught lacking big time. None of them brought anything even remotely waterproof. For example, Frank's giant pillow sack was white in color, meaning that when the rain hit it, you could see all the contents inside. I guess he accidentally got a little bit of air trapped in that whoopee cushion of his too, because every time the pillow sack jiggled up and down as a result of Frank walking, a minuscule fart sound would emanate from it. I don't know though. Kinda seems like something Frank would do on purpose, knowing him. Frank exclaimed in pure joy. "Frank, I hope you have some dry clothes in that pillow sack of yours for tonight, or you won't be so giddish about the water," Colin warned him.
"Man, now this is what I call some true tough man conditioning,"
Steve proclaimed. We all continued hiking through the rainy forest for some time longer, It's pretty foggy now, making the entire area around us seem quite eerie, as we were the only people out there on the trail. The dense fog made all the thick fir and spruce trees around us look only like mere silhouettes. It's pretty cool, but also quite creepy at the same time. We went on and on in the rain for quite some time. By now, even Colin and I were a bit wet. Not Chad though, no, as it was a certified fact that not a molecule of H2O would penetrate through his brand new Ultra Hydra Shield 3000 rain jacket. He even made sure that the rain knew who's boss when it came to the gains as well.
Whew, pretty arid out here, ain't it, Bruce?
Chad jokingly inquired.
Shut up, bitch!
Steve replied, now soaked 100% at this point. Anyway, after what felt like hours of hiking through the cold, wet forest, we were finally relieved to see the Zealand Falls mountain hut in the distance through the trees. This looks pretty creepy, Colin said. Let me check the map to make sure we're at the right place. I had to agree with Colin on this one. It would never do any harm just to make sure we're where we need to be. The Creepy Falls hut, Colin said in confusion. Last time I checked, it was Zealand Falls. It is Zealand Falls, I confirmed. I knew that fact off of memory, as I'd been there in years past. I took the map from Colin's hands and took a look for myself. Sure enough, the heading for the Zealand Falls hut had mysteriously been changed by the cartographer to the Creepy Falls hut. It was weird and, ironically, creepy that the name had been changed to something so alarming. But based on the hut's location, it kind of made sense why. Unlike the Lake of the Clouds hut from the other night, which is above tree line, out in the open, this hut was tucked away, deep in the forest. Its creepiness was only accentuated by the rain and the fog. The five of us grew closer to the hut, and were able to get a look at it fully. It had the appearance of a regular mountain hut, but it was a bit too worn down looking to be even legally operating according to state regulations. We walked onto the front porch and took a gander at the sign on the door. Closed for the season? Come on! Colin exclaimed in frustration. I don't blame him at all. Hours of hiking in the cold rain, only to be brought to find out that the hut was closed. No wonder we were the only people hiking on the trail. This sucked balls though. We had been looking forward to a dry place to sleep along with a hot meal all day long, and now we'd be forced to continue hiking to try and find a spot where we could set up camp, which would be all wet and miserable. I sighed. Come on, guys. Let's go find a spot off in the woods to set up our tents. Steve, Frank, I hope you two have been working on your survival shelter building skills. And so, we all despairingly turned around and began walking off the wooden porch. However, our despair soon turned into worry when a muffled voice called out from inside the hut. The voice was quite high-pitched and had some sort of weird SoCo-Cali surfer accent from the 80s.
Whoa now. Don't you boys turn around just yet? The Creepy Falls might be closed for the season, but we can make a few exceptions now. For some special boys, that is.
The voice said from deep within the hut. It's kind of alarming and weird though. It seemed as if whoever was in there was desperate for us not to leave. We all stood there confused, not knowing what to do next. We were feeling pretty uneasy about the whole thing, and as you're about to find out, for good reason.
Come on now, boys, don't be shy. Y'all can come on inside whenever you like,
the voice mentioned.
You don't know about this one, Bruce,
Chad said cautiously, but Steve had had enough.
Man, fuck this shit. I'd be sick and tired of being out in the rain. I am not sleeping with the bugs in some stupid-ass teepee. That'd be some buzzman type shit.
Steve then stormed into the hut, and so we naturally followed in after him. Inside the hut, the lighting was very dim. There was putrid smell coming from the kitchen, meaning something vile must have been cooking up back in there. We took a look around. This hut seemed to have a bunch of old antique decorations that seemed to be from the old fur trapping and pioneering days. There were a bunch of old and vintage hiking equipment present too. The five of us awkwardly stood around for a minute. Just then, the worker came out from the kitchen to greet us boys at the front desk.
Good evening, boys,
he said.
It's a little rainy outside to be hiking now, is it?
Oh, no, Colin exclaimed. It was the creepy clerk, the same guy from Seabase the previous summer. He was a moldy-looking dude in his 50s or something. He had long, greasy hair, a pot belly, along with a chubby face. He wore muddy hiking boots on his feet, a green denim jacket, 80s style gym trainers on his legs, revealing those hairy thighs. I had no idea how in the world this dude managed to attain a job working at the New Hampshire mountain huts. Bro, how many fucking jobs do you have? I demanded.
Well, you know, boys, I was spending the summer visiting some relatives up here in the New Hampshire land. And as you boys already knew, I gotta make sure and provide for my family. So, I figured may as well pick up some job working up at the mountain huts. Not to mention, mountaineering's in my DNA, boys. It's been a creepy clerk tradition for lots of years. What better way to get back in touch with the primal mountain roots than to pick up a job as a hut master?
Oh no, this is not okay, I firmly state. Listen, we know all about you and we know all about your sick little gimmicks. You need to pack up your shit, hike back to your car, and drive home now.
Come on, boys. It's gonna be a chill night up in here. Hut's all vacant, you know. So I say we settle in for the evening. I can bring up some fresh weenies. Also, maybe later, we can bring things back to my bunk. Get a little dirty after all,
the creepy clerk said, creepily. Listen, man, Colin stated. I'm gonna lay down the line with you once and for all. We're just here to stay the night in peace. We're leaving first thing in the morning. Stay out of our business. The only reason we're here is because it's raining outside, okay? Now we're gonna go and settle into our bunk room now. Don't do anything.
Don't worry, boys. It's going to be a chill night. Dinner will be ready soon. I made it special just for some special boys,
the creepy clerk replied. Man, this dude is so weird, I murmured. Anyway, we all head down a tight hallway to get to our bunk room. The creepy clerk simply watched us as we did this with some creepy eyes, the same kind from the previous summer, back at Seabase. Okay, guys, I told everyone, we only gotta make it through tonight. Then, we're chillin'. Let's keep our mouths shut so we don't give the creepy clerk any more ideas. Colin, Chad, and Steve all agreed. The next hour was pretty uneventful. The creepy clerk was out of her hair, luckily. That was likely because he was busy cooking up back in the kitchen. Based on the smell of it, I pretty much already knew I would just eat some of my trail mix for dinner instead. I simply spent the hour chatting with Colin and Chad about random stuff. Steve was sat in the corner, quietly listening to music on his phone, and Frank was taking a shit.
Alright, boys, dinner is served,
the creepy clerk said as he emerged from the kitchen. Oh no, he seemed pretty alarming as he was now shirtless, but wore a chef's bra around his nipples. The most alarming part, however, was the big old pot of soup that was attached around his waist. The pot hung right below his stomach. It was attached to a big leather belt. The creepy clerk then did the most unexpected thing yet.
Let's eat, boys. Creepy fam style, that is.
The creepy clerk then gets under the table. He then proceeded to insert the big pot of soup up through a pot-sized, dare I say, hole that was not in the table previously. The hole was the exact size and diameter as the pot was. That made it look like there was just a big plain old pot of soup sitting on the table, but we suspected otherwise. Our suspicions were confirmed correct when the pot slowly began rotating. We looked underneath the table and saw the creepy clerk rotating as well. His muddy hiking boots would rub against my knees every time he made a revolution. We were about to muster up some courage and look and see what was inside that pot, but we were suddenly distracted due to the sound of clunky footsteps on the porch outside.
Seems like the chief do have to see you, boys,
the creepy clerk announced, his voice muffled from being underneath the table. The what? I asked, confused. What do you mean the chief thru-hiker? There was no time for questions, though, as just then, the chief came strolling inside. It was none other than Herbert Ernie himself, still in the exact same attire from when we saw him a few days ago in Mount Washington, although now soaking wet from the rain. He also now had on a pair of frosted goggles so he could see better, although that's pretty ironic as, wouldn't they fog up? I don't know, honestly. Herbert, how did you know we'd be at the hut? Colin demanded.
Nothing, buddy. The creepy clerk should be right. Stay the creepy phone. I figured. Babes with it. During my journey to Maine, you know?
Herbert explained. This was false, though, and Herbert's entire explanation didn't make much sense. It was completely and utterly flawed. Herbert claimed that he was heading northbound on the AT, as of him announcing at Mount Washington. However, the Zealand Falls area in which we were at was south of Mount Washington, making Herbert's whole Appalachian Trail through hike expedition a complete lie. It was very obvious. Herbert, what are you really doing out here in the mountains like this? I demanded. Herbert insisted as he threw his hiking poles up in the air, sounding like a childish brat. I'm enjoying this supper, Chief, Creepy Clerk said. Herbert then came on over and sat at the table, completely forgetting to drop his backpack. It was right then and there that we finally had the courage to go ahead and see what was inside that pot. Guys, Colin said, voice going cold. We need to leave. Right now. I too take a look in the pot and completely see what Colin was talking about. Inside the pot was simply just a bunch of chicken noodle soup. That wasn't all though. Oh no. See, at the bottom of that pot of chicken noodle soup was a 1 inch in diameter hole cut out in it. And sticking through that 1 inch in diameter hole into the soup was a 1 inch Creepy Clerk dong. Oh fuck nah, I said. Bro, I said no gimmicks, Colin shouted in frustration. I don't know though. Something told me this may have been more than just a little gimmick when it came to the Creepy Clerk. Something told me that it was likely something a bit more serious, rugged, and down to earth. I don't want to get into that though. But anyway, all of us, except for Herbert, sprang up from the table before rushing back into our bunk room to grab our gear. We locked the door behind us so neither Herbert nor the Creepy Clerk could get inside. We packed up our items and Chad, Colin, and I got our headlamps on, since it was all the way dark outside by that point. Steve and Frank would use their phone flashlights by means of navigation. Once our things were together, we ran back out into the main area, and were scarred for life at what we saw.
Just whammo you most doing.
Herbert snarkishly said. Herbert and the Creepy Clerk were now riding on top of each other. The Creepy Clerk was standing on the bottom, with Herbert Ernie sitting on his shoulders. That wasn't the craziest part of it all, though. They were both inside one giant caterpillar costume. It was like 10 feet high and super fat. It had a big red face, big bulging eyes, and looked super realistic. And in each of its little caterpillar hands is a bottle of expired mountain relish.
Now that Chief is here, boys, we can get down to the real business of the hoodie hut,
the Creepy Clerk proclaimed, whatever that meant. We did not want to stick around to find out, though. Herbert screamed, crazily, ultra crazily. We didn't waste any more time. We bust out the door of the Creepy Falls hut and out into the cold, dark, and stormy night. But we didn't care. Our decision to leave was confirmed when the giant caterpillar came outside after us. Herbert said, his voice muffled from being inside of the costume. Run! Colin exclaimed. We did just that, although, looking back on it, we likely didn't need to run like that, as Herbert, Ernie, and the Creepy Clerk were really only moving at like 0.01 miles per hour whilst in that stupid-ass costume. But yeah, we ran nonetheless, not daring to ever look back. We ran all the way through the rainy night, all the way down the mountain, and all the way back to the car. I had no idea how in the world we didn't get lost. Once we were in the car, we still didn't feel safe. I switched on the ignition and hightailed it out of there. It was only once we made it out of the White Mountain National Forest that we calmed down enough to talk to each other in an understandable way. That was crazy, I said.
Yeah, man,
Steve replied.
Shit was getting way too weird for your boy up there.
I had to agree. After talking a bit more, we ultimately decided that it'd be of best practice to end the trip early, as we were all traumatized from what Herbert and the Creepy Clerk had done. I never found out the real reason for Herbert being up in the mountains that weekend, and it was obvious his whole through hiking facade was obviously false. And the Creepy Clerk? Well, I ended up doing some research and found out that the Zealand Falls hut had actually been closed down for quite some time, and that the Creepy Clerk was likely using it as a sort of little dirty retreat up in the mountains. I am happy to say, though, that the police did a swoop of the area, the Zealand Falls hut area that is, and said that both Herbert Ernie and the creepy clerk were arrested and taken away. That was probably for the best, as while the cops were investigating the hut, they found all sorts of despicable items, everything from dirty toys, mysterious pills, all the way to pictures taken from random hikers who were passing through the area. Pretty creepy. We all drove through the night, only stopping to use the bathroom. It was like 4 a.m. by the time we finally made it back to Maryland. I simply dropped everyone off before going back to my own house. Once I arrived back, I simply fell asleep on my bed, not even wanting to think about the trip anymore. And that then concludes the White Mountain Minglers.